Congratulations, YouTube. You did it. You wore me down and you sucked me back in. I have too many subscribers here just to walk away entirely, especially with no alternative that truly stacks up and so many copycat channels uploading my shows for me anyway. But we can't forget that THC's account here is on thin ice. And so the YouTube version of the show has to be prefaced with this little PSA, only to say that episodes that contain the kinds of themes that have been regularly banned on YouTube will not appear here. And even with that precaution, there's already enough in the archive to get us removed, so remember that the Higherside Chats could be banned or put in timeout again at any time. And I won't be able to tell you guys about it. So if you feel like it's been too long since you've heard from me here on this digital, dystopian, draconian, data mining monster of a police state seeking platform, your first step should be to check the HighersideChats.com for the latest shows. Alright? Alright. Enjoy.
Brace yourself, because you're about to dive into another free first-hour episode of the Higherside Chats, and we just want to let you know that whether you're looking for a companion through your paranoid insomnia, entertaining yourself through one of life's mundane activities, or trying to ward off the internal screams of all those sad, smothered souls around the office, THC is here. And you should know that every episode of the Higherside Chats has an entire second hour for Plus members. Sign up at the HighersideChatsPlus.com, and you'll get years of Plus show archives, lifetime forum access, a special invite to Greg Carlwood's monthly joint sessions, MP3s of THC music, bonus episodes, tour videos, and 10% off t-shirts, grinders, and whatever else ends up in the Higherside store. It's $8 a month that you won't miss, so become a Plus member and treat yourself in these troubled times. Always action-packed and commercial-free, which means you'll unfortunately never hear my voice again.
Alright, Higherside Chatters, as we roll our way through the cornucopia of campaigns against the people, we tend to see a synergy between them that cannot be overlooked. That tells us something about the puppet masters of the pyramid. They have their hands in a lot of pies, but that fresh fruit filling has been replaced with aluminum, mercury, fluoride, glyphosate, gasoline, and a whole host of substances that aren't nearly as good for people as they are for profits. And if that wasn't enough, they've completely captured the education system, the top internet platforms, and pretty much any other messaging apparatus, and weaponized the findings from their behavioral scientists think tank so that most people won't have any conspiracies about their precious masters. Well, that's why we have shows like this and guests like Charlie Robinson. Charlie is the author of The Octopus of Global Control, that wily bastard THC fans know all too well. It's a controversial and humorous book that takes quotes from over 500 witnesses to some of history's greatest events and uses them to piece together and expose a century-long plan for worldwide domination. He had a front row seat to the fraud and corruption in the mortgage industry during his career in Las Vegas real estate, and he credits John Perkin's book Confessions of an Economic Hitman as the final piece of the puzzle that helped him to really see how the American government operates as the enforcement arm for multinational companies. Well, pack your glass and park your ass, dear people, because we are poking that big octa-bear today. Charlie, my man, welcome to the Higherside.
Thanks for having me, and I have to say this right off the bat, that goddamn theme song of yours has been stuck in my head on so many occasions, I can't even tell you.
Good to hear. That is the point of good magic, I'm told.
For sure, yeah, it subconsciously sticks with you all day long.
Well, you know, man, this is going to be a lot of fun because you wrote one hell of a book. I tend to like these overarching conspiratorial encyclopedias or reference guides that just go through the whole puzzle piece by piece. But what's most unique about yours, as I said in the intro there, you use quotes generally from the elite talking about their own plans. And I tend to think that's one of the best ways to approach these things for new people and to get them converted to our team. And with such a wide-ranging book, I think we ought to start by getting that overview. And you can tell us a little bit about why you decided to ostracize yourself from your friends and family with a book like this.
Well, it certainly did that, yeah. I have ruined Thanksgiving dinners before by bringing up 9/11, and you just feel that table turn on you. And they're like, honest, this is the last time you're coming to Thanksgiving with us. But it's funny because the book came out of just an accidental conversation I had with my mom. I discovered some new fantastic conspiracy that I had never heard of before. And I was kind of explaining it to her because she was one of the few people that would actually sit down and listen to something like that. And she asked me a very simple question. She said, "That's great. You've got all this information now. What do you plan to do with it?" And I was like, "I don't know. It never occurred to me that I had to do anything with it. I just felt like I was compiling it, but never with any sort of intention." So after that, I kind of took a step back and I thought, well, if I had to do something with this, what would I do? And so I just decided I would start writing. Now, I didn't tell anyone I wrote. And when I say I didn't tell anyone, I mean, I didn't tell anyone. My wife didn't know. I snuck out of bed in the middle of the night, went into the office, wrote a couple pages, went back to bed. And I did that for a couple reasons. First, I didn't really feel like I had a ton of support for it. And another thing is, I just didn't know how far I was going to take it. I didn't know if it was going to be one of those things that sounds like a good idea and you get a couple weeks into it and you go, it was kind of fizzled out. So I didn't want to say anything. I didn't want to have any sort of expectations. I just said, I'll just write it. And if it feels good, I'll keep writing. And if it doesn't, I'll quit and no one will know anything about it. So I started writing and I couldn't stop. The theme of it, like the purpose of it, was that I felt like when I'm at that Thanksgiving dinner table and I'm trying to have a conversation about some of these difficult topics and I want to bring some facts into it, my voice alone meant nothing at that table. I was not an expert. They didn't care what I had to say. These people knew me for a long, long time. And so I didn't have any sort of expert status. But if they could hear the voices, if they could read the words of some of these people that they do know, some of these people that they do respect or names that they recognize, like Rothschilds and Rockefellers and Clintons and Bushes, and they heard those words either because they respected them or because they knew that they were legit power players, maybe it would give my argument a little bit more credibility. Maybe I'd be able to drag that into the conversation and they wouldn't be able to be so dismissive of it. So my feeling was, I have my take on how things are going and how things have gone and how things are set up to move in the future. And that's great. And that's definitely expressed in the book. But I wanted to bring in the voices of people that had a front row seat to them. Some of them directly, Rothschilds and David Rockefeller talking about New World Order. And, you remember George H.W. Bush going on and on about, we have a New World Order in front of us and all that stuff. But also George Carlin, and also Bill Hicks and also Joe Rogan and guys like that, guys that have sort of a comedic take on it, because let's be honest, some of this stuff is really serious and it's overwhelming. And like, if you get bogged down into it all, you can go a little bit crazy. You have to kind of laugh at it. So the third piece of the puzzle, besides my voice and other people's voices, was to insert some sort of humor as best I could in my really warped, destroyed sense of humor of, how I could bring that to the table and maybe people could hang in through the serious parts and get them into the next chapter.
Kindred spirits, man. I do appreciate that you have a good sense of humor about all of it. I've been accused of being a little insensitive for similar reasons, but I think it's important to know the truth of these things. And if that leads you to living a depressed life, then they pretty much win anyway. People always ask me when I'm interviewed on other shows, do you get depressed being a conspiracy host looking at this stuff all the time? I'm like, no, I was depressed standing behind a cash register for peanuts all day.
Yeah.
Because in that life and in this life, I was still looking at the same material. So it's really about, I think, seeing through the lies and then breaking free yourself to live the life you want to live. And to kind of expand on what you had just said, I heard you saying something when you were on Grammarica, which is a funny synchronistic loop in itself. You heard them on THC. Yep. They had you on their show. Then I heard that, and now here we are.
Yep.
But you had said, if I could give people the context of why I think the way I think, maybe they wouldn't consider me so crazy. And that is just so in line with why I went down this path too. And your book does a great job of using those quotes for that very purpose. They weaponize what we say, we should weaponize what they say.
For sure. And yeah, and I used the term that I called verbal judo, which was like taking the weight of their words and using it against them. I mean, they do it to us all the time, so why not do it back to them?
Right. And now that the book is out, do you feel like you've made progress towards that goal?
I do. I've actually been really surprised at the response. I was pretty convinced I was going to get, a lot of hate emails I'd tackle some fairly polarizing subjects. And I have gotten a few, but not as many as I thought. Overwhelmingly, the response has been pretty positive in the way that the fact that I tackle a ton of topics, so you don't have to read the whole book. You can find a couple topics in there that really resonate with you. But like most things, the way it works, I think, when we get into this world, is that it starts with one thing. And you realize, hey, there's something wrong with this story, or there's something wrong with this event, the way it went down, and it's a lie. And then if this is a lie, then what else is a lie? So to me, the trigger was 9/11 in general, but Building 7 in particular, which I think a lot of people can understand. You look at that, you don't have to be a structural engineer to understand that there's something wrong with that story. So you watch that and you go, okay, there's a problem there. And then that leads you to something else and something else. So for me, when I wrote the book, I thought it'd be great if somebody could give this book to somebody in their life that is maybe on the edge or maybe not completely understanding what's going on. You could say, listen, you don't have to get into 9/11, but maybe Vietnam is your thing. Maybe Uncle Bob went to Vietnam and then he reads that the Gulf of Tonkin incident not only didn't happen the way they said it was, but it was an actual non-event and then triggered a war. And then once that guy gets into that part of the book, then he goes, oh my God, this makes sense. So if this is a lie, what about Desert Storm? What about Iraq? What about Afghanistan? So my feeling was that it would maybe spread. And that's the response I've gotten back from people, is that they enjoyed it and that they maybe thought that they were going to focus on one topic and it led them to some other topics in the book. That ultimately was the plan. Listen, it's not going to be for everyone and not everybody's going to like it. And it's a big book too. I mean, let's be honest, it's practically a doorstop, but that's okay. You don't have to kill trees. You can get a digital version. Take a look at it, send it to somebody that's in your life that you're like, hey, listen, maybe you can help me understand this one issue in this. Here, read this chapter in this book and tell me if you can maybe help me understand how this could have happened, instead of saying, hey, it didn't happen this way and you're wrong. And here, I want you to read this and I'm going to show you you're wrong. I think that's the wrong approach. Maybe like you just say, hey, I read this. I'm having a hard time understanding this. Maybe you can read it and help me understand it. And they'll take a look at it and they'll say, oh, no, I can't help you understand it because it doesn't make sense. It sounds crazy. And so that, to me, I think is a better approach as far as spreading the word, instead of, hey, you over there, you're wrong. This is the way it really happens. It's tempting to do that. We've all done it, and it doesn't work very well. Instead, I found sort of making it humorous. Like those guys in Grammarica, they're the best, man. And we had so much fun. I mean, I could have talked to those guys forever. I actually felt like I was hanging out in their igloo with them. And I have to thank you because I got turned on to them by listening to you. And so, like you said, it's like this little feedback loop of love.
Yeah, man. I like them a lot too. And I think you're right about how people end up going down these rabbit holes and then connecting all the big pieces. For 9/11, I didn't have a hard time accepting it when I heard the case made, but then when I talked to other people and I could see how triggered they got by it, I would then think, like, how do we approach this? And I would think, is there a precedent for this? We think of 9/11 and it's like such a huge, crazy event, but is there a precedent for false flags? And then, of course, you go back and, like you mentioned, Gulf of Tonkin, Operation Northwoods, you see these other things that are on record. And it's like, oh, okay, well, use those things to extrapolate a pattern, and you can maybe make the case without getting so emotional or getting people all worked up. And I agree. It's just like kind of a puzzle in its own way of being like, how do I get these people over here? There's got to be some approach that will work. And it's a game in itself. But I wanted to talk about some of the quotes because they are peppered through every subject in the book, and you include some of my favorites. In fact, I used one on a friend the other day who finds it ridiculous that the moon landing could have been a hoax, and I gave him that Neil Armstrong quote from his speech on the 25th anniversary, where he said, instead of waxing on and on about this crowning achievement of man, he said, "Today we have with us a group of students among America's best. To you we say we have only completed a beginning. We leave you much that is undone. There are great ideas undiscovered, breakthroughs available to those who can remove one of truth's protective layers. There are places to go beyond belief. These challenges are yours in many fields, not the least of which is space, because there lies human destiny." I mean, that says a lot to me. And sometimes a quote like that from a source like him gives people more pause than trying to go over the moon landing footage. So that's one of my favorites. But what would you throw out there as maybe some of yours?
I'll take a step in that light too, which is when the unlikable Bryant Gumbel is interviewing Michael Collins on the 20th anniversary. And he says something kind of similar. He says, Mike Collins, but for a day, how often are you reminded of your achievement? And Michael Collins says, well, if I go out back and look up in the sky and see the moon, either I can remember where I was 20 years ago, or I can pretend I've never been there. It works for me either way. And you're like, huh? Like what? Okay, that doesn't prove anything, but that is a weird comment to make. And I kind of felt the same way as you. It's like with this moon landing thing, it's the one conspiracy that people actively protest against because we like it. Like we want to be, hey, we're America, we went to the moon, or hey, we're human beings, we went to the moon, and that's a great achievement. And so for me, it was always difficult. But I look at things like that press conference when they got back, when Buzz Aldrin, Neil Armstrong, and Michael Collins are sitting at that table. The three of them have just come back from the biggest achievement in human history, and they look like hostages. I mean, they are sitting there, jaws clenched, hands clasped together, afraid to talk. I mean, it was just a very unnatural reaction to such an outstanding and amazing event. Like a lot of these things, it doesn't prove anything in and of itself. But when you put all these things together, it just seems like a very weird response to something like that. I mean, and you watched Buzz Aldrin, well, all of them had alcohol problems after that. Neil Armstrong didn't talk to anyone, with the exception of that quote that he gave. And it was a really cryptic one. And yeah, of course, people say, well, they can't keep a secret like that for that long. Of course they can. When they pull them aside and say, hey, listen, if you ever say that none of this happened, we'll kill you and your entire family, every generation of them. Believe me, you're going to keep your mouth shut. And I don't know that that is exactly what happened, but that's my assumption because they have kept this lie going for a long time.
Right.
And I say that with angst because I hate the idea that something like that was a lie. But I just have to take a couple steps back and look at it objectively and take my personal opinions out of it. And I have a hard time seeing that for anything other than just a gigantic fraud perpetrated on the people, and that NASA has been, like, to use a poker term, pot committed to that lie for decades now. I mean, there's no benefit in them for saying, yeah, listen,
right.
We didn't actually go there. And so people say, well, if you think that, how can you say that? Well, I can say that fairly easily just by using the words of the current astronauts that are talking about the Orion mission. This is something that's been widely talked about. If you've gone to the moon and back 7 times, then you have gone through the Van Allen radiation belt. There's a great video of them interviewing Alan Bean, asking him about how going through the Van Allen radiation belt, and he's going, what's that? Oh, I guess we went through it then. I guess I didn't even know. I mean, he's a horrible liar. So people say, well, you're speculating on this. Look, NASA puts out promotion videos that say, this next generation spacecraft will enable America to explore beyond low Earth orbit. Okay, I thought we've gone beyond low Earth orbit multiple times here.
Yeah.
And then you get Kelly Smith, who's a NASA engineer, discussing the upcoming Orion missions. This is in 2014. He says, as we get further away from Earth, we'll pass through the Van Allen radiation belts, an area of dangerous radiation. Radiation like this can harden the guidance systems on board computers or other electronics on Orion. Naturally, we have to pass through this danger zone twice, once up, once back. But Orion has protection. Shielding will be put to the test as the vehicle cuts through waves of radiation. Sensors aboard will record radiation levels for scientists to study. We must solve these challenges before we send people through this region of space. I'm sorry, Kelly, but I have a question for you. I thought we've sent people through there 7 times. So why do we have to solve this before they go through space? So this is not me being some tinfoil hat wearing lunatic. Like, these are their words. This is what journalists should be. I'm not a journalist, but this is what a journalist should be doing. They should be raising their hands at these press conferences saying, I have a question. Like, how is it that you can say, right now, we can only fly in low Earth orbit? That's the farthest we can go. That's Colonel Terry Virts doing an interview from the International Space Station talking about how they can't go further than that. So if you can't go further than that, how did you get to the moon? I don't find this to be a really difficult line of question. I find it weird, though, that people are so defensive about, like, hey, no, don't ask those questions.
Yeah.
Well, why not?
Indeed, man. I just love that approach of using their own words against them. There's a whole nother kind of topic that's really hot right now I've interviewed guests about, which is technology having spiritual implications or coming from some type of spiritual source, something that you wouldn't think would be connected. And I know a lot of people might think that's nuts, but then you use their quotes in the same kind of context. I think the guy who created the D-Wave quantum computer, he has quotes out there about the technology being like channeling something from another dimension. I mean, these are curious terms to be using for a scientist if these people are really wrong about there being a connection somewhere in there. So I just think it's really funny. And in terms of the moon landing, another one I really like is the Bill Clinton one, just because it comes from his book, his autobiography. So it's very easy to source. And you're like, yeah, that is a real quote. And he says, just a month after the Apollo 11 astronauts walked on the moon, an old carpenter asked me if I really believe it happened. I said, sure, I saw it on television. He disagreed. He said that he didn't believe it for a minute, that them television fellers could make anything look real that wasn't. Back then, I thought he was a crank. During my 8 years in Washington, I saw some things on TV that made me wonder if he wasn't ahead of his time. I mean, let's let a conventional person sit with that quote from a previous president that ties in a lot of stuff and has some wide-ranging implications. You know, are they going to just say that amounts to nothing? Because I think that'd be pretty naive.
Of course it would be naive. But if you don't want to believe it, you will find excuses and reasons not to want to go down that path. Look, Bill Clinton is certainly not a reliable source as far as the truth goes. He might have had a moment there where he actually let his guard down and was talking about that. And I don't think that anything he said is actually that unusual. Yeah, those television fellows can make things that aren't true look real. That, of course, is obvious. To hear Bill Clinton say it, I thought was a little bit surprising. But you don't even have to get into the scientific aspects of it. Something as simple as, hey, how come all the photographs from the moon landing, they all came back perfectly framed, no blurs, they didn't get screwed up by the radiation, and they didn't have a viewfinder in which to do it? That's a simple question that, if I take my cell phone camera out and shoot 100 pictures, I'm going to get a couple of them that are blurry, a couple of them that are bad, and I have a viewfinder in which to look through. So the fact that they all came out perfect on the moon, it's just an anomaly. It doesn't prove that the whole thing was fake, but you just have to take that one thing and go, that is unusual, and put that off to the side. And if you get enough unusual things that sort of pile up, you start to get a different view of reality. I understand their reasons for wanting to fake the moon landing. I also have a conflicting views on this because I believe there's a secret space program, but at the same time, I don't think they went to the moon with Apollo. I even contradict myself in some aspects of this, but I just look at that and I go, you're not going to the moon in a Volkswagen Bug in 1969 with hand calculator technology, and you're not going to get it right the first time because nobody does that. You can't land these things perfectly the first time. In fact, there's footage of Neil Armstrong trying to fly that damn lunar rover and ejecting about a half a second before he exploded. So, it's a tough thing to fly around, but yet they got everything right, including the pictures, the first try. To me, it just seems like the odds are against them for that.
Oh, yeah. And I went down to Houston and took a tour of that NASA facility, and I sat in the control room and I looked at the real consoles they were using and heard the tour guide, talk about all the crowning achievements, blah, blah, blah. I actually sat in the seat next to the one that Queen Elizabeth sat in, and that seat was actually broken. So I think her karma's following her around. But you look at those
maybe
things,
her tail broke it.
Exactly. But you look at those consoles and you're just like, there is no way. And what was funny is that the two biggest consoles were public relations. And it's like, oh yeah, because this is a public relations media event. And it's insane from 2018, knowing how Wi-Fi works, even in just today's age, that you got these people controlled from the ground in Houston, Texas, to the moon and back 6 times, no accident. I think the idea that they landed there, sure, accept that. But you think that in a foreign environment they've never been in before, when all these things are spinning at thousands of miles an hour, rotating and orbiting, they just got back. It is just kind of crazy to think. I don't know. That's not a scientific argument, but another thing I like to cite is they lost all the telemetry data, and there's been cases of NASA giving out moon rocks as a kind of a present to other countries or nations, and they've tested them and they're fake. They've given them petrified wood, I believe it was.
Yeah, that's exactly right. In fact, there's a quote from Stan Liebar. He's the designer of the lunar video camera that was used by Neil Armstrong. He says, "So I don't believe that the tapes exist today at all. It was a hard thing to accept, but there's just an overwhelming amount of evidence that led us to believe that they just don't exist anymore, and you have to accept reality." Well, you know what? I disagree, Stan. We don't have to accept reality. The reality that NASA decided to record over the tapes of the lunar landing to save money is preposterous, and it's an insult to anybody's intelligence. I mean, this is an organization that has siphoned off trillions of dollars, and now all of a sudden they're shopping at Marshall's and Costco to save money. I mean, give me a break. It's preposterous. And the fact that they're trying to pass that off to us as like, hey, listen, you just have to accept it. No, I'm sorry, we don't. They recorded over the telemetry data, so you can't use that. Everything that would prove their existence of going there has been either lost or recorded over. The most important event in human history, and they recorded over it to save money. I'm sorry. I don't have to accept that, Stan. And the fact that you're trying to push that discredits you completely, because anybody that's trying to pass that off as some sort of reality that we need to embrace is out of their mind.
Couldn't agree more. It's just like, at what point does a conventional person start to have doubt? I mean, just because there is an answer, I deal with this with my more conventional friends all the time. Just because there is an answer given does not mean that is a satisfactory response to the question, when it comes to certain conspiratorial things, like the old swamp gas thing. Here's something mysterious that people saw. Guy comes on TV, says it's swamp gas, and now because an answer was given, you're just like, well, he told you what it was. I'm like, no, he said something, right, but that doesn't have anything to do with what that actually was. And let's get provocative. If we're going to get past the moon landing, a huge thing in NASA's wheelhouse, how far do you think NASA lies go?
There's no reason to think that they haven't lied about everything. They're handing out fake moon rocks that are petrified wood, not opinion. That's fact. You've even got the Dutch saying, yeah, we still keep it because it's kind of funny. Yeah, it's funny that NASA's handing out fake moon rocks. That's hilarious, except that, hey, we paid for all that stuff. So if you're handing out fake moon rocks, what else about your organization is totally fake? I say that with no joy because I'm named after Charlie Duke, one of the astronauts. I have a signed picture from him on the moon saying, I hope that your life is as eventful as mine. And I look at that and I just want to throw it out. Yeah, I really do. And I want to throw it out the window because I'm like, you lying bastard. But this was one that came on slowly. It was one of those things that's it took a while because I have to admit it. I don't want to believe it. I like the lie. I like the lie that we all went and that it was great and we got there safely and everything's fine. That lie is awesome, but it's a lie. And so I have to be consistent then and say, even though this might be a lie that I want to believe, I have to put it off to the side and say I don't believe it. And by the way, it's a weird thing that happens when you talk about somebody giving you a reason like swamp gas. It's weird when the first explanation gets in everybody's mind and is stuck there until another better answer comes and knocks it off. It's like that first skier, like the downhill ski, and the guy who goes first, his score, no matter what it is, or his time is number one. And you're like, hey, I'm in first place. Well, you got to let all the skiers come down. Then we'll see how that is. But with NASA, with the mainstream media, with people in government, they give you this crappy answer. And for whatever reason, it sticks in your head. And then every other possible answer is saddled with the responsibility of knocking that one off the top spot. And for people that just have kind of a casual relationship with the news, they sort of read a headline or they watch the nightly news and they hear 5 seconds of something. As far as they're concerned, whatever that first answer is that gets in their head, that's reality. And that's a problem because we've been lied to about so many things, especially on the nightly news. My God. It's almost as if they can't tell the truth about anything. When they give me the weather report, honest to God, I really don't believe that even the weather is going to be real. Maybe I just need to check myself. But seriously, there's been so many lies. So, when you come across people and they say, well, it was swamp gas. And you're like, that's because that's the only explanation you heard. Therefore, that's your reality. But what if we were to present you 8 different other options and you could take a look at those objectively? Then what would you think? Well, what would happen would be, for the most part, it would still be swamp gas as the answer in the person's head, because to unpack the possibilities of what the other answers could mean, it might be too much work. And I'm like, a guy's like, listen, I don't need this sort of shit in my life right now. I got enough to worry about. I don't need to have to go back and reevaluate whether the moon landing happened or not, because then that changes the way I think about all kinds of things. And frankly, that's too big of a responsibility right now. So I can understand sort of the mechanics of the brain and how this works. But I think we owe it to ourselves and our families, our kids, to not just blindly accept these answers that are coming from positions of authority, because a lot of times there's an agenda behind them. And we're told these things not because they're the truth, but because we're being set up, or because it's necessary for us to feel this or think one way or hate a group of people or hate a particular country. It's important for us to feel that way so that they can have the support to do the evil things that they want to do.
Indeed, man. And that's so funny that you have that autographed picture. And talk about wanting to believe things. The only Kickstarter I ever funded was for the Mini Museum. It's 33 rare specimens from Earth and beyond, and it's all in epoxy or whatever. There's a lunar rock, a piece of the lunar command module. There's a Martian rock. There's some meteorite. There's a palm tree from Antarctica. I guess that one might be legit. There's dinosaur egg, triceratops horn, T-Rex dung. There's a lot of things in here that people are casting doubt on these days. I mean, I guess I could trust maybe this piece from Abraham Lincoln's house. I don't know. But
33 different options. 33.
Oh, no, you got me. Yep. Oh, man, people get a hold of this thing, they'll assume all 33 things are somehow a lie because it's a Masonic artifact or something.
That's right.
So you mentioned the secret space program and the breakaway civilization stuff. I really am a fan of that wheelhouse for sure. And you have a quote in the book. It's more of like a back and forth transcription of an interview. And you call it Ben Rich's walk-off home run. Tell us about that, because it kind of gets at what might be on the other side of a space program, maybe more in the shadows, on the other side of NASA, let's say.
Yeah, Ben Rich was the head of Lockheed Skunk Works. So Lockheed Martin now is obviously really powerful. They've got the inside scoop on everything. But then within Lockheed, you've got Skunk Works, which is more of the secret space program. And it's a back and forth conversation in 1993. He's given a speech at UCLA, and Jan Harzen, who is the international director of MUFON now, I don't know that he was at the time. I think he was just an engineer. He said that he and 20 or so engineers gathered around Ben Rich after the speech, and Ben Rich turns the tables on them and asks them a question. He says, "Do you think it's possible to travel to the stars?" And one of the engineers says, "I don't know. It would just take a long time to get there." And his response is, "We found an error in the equation, and we know how to travel to the stars, and it won't take us a lifetime to do it." So, of course, that's a pretty big statement. So Jan Harzen chases him out to the parking lot and says, "I have one more question. Maybe you could help me out." So he says to Ben Rich, he says, "I have an interest in propulsion that you're talking about, how that gets us to the stars. Can you tell me how it works?" And Ben Rich says back, "Do you know how ESP works?" And Jan Harzen says, "I don't know. All points in space and time are connected." And Ben Rich says, "That's how it works." And he turned and walked away, died a couple years after that. So, that's a crazy one. So when you're talking about all points, time and space are connected, that's how it works, by an older guy who's sort of at the end of his life, maybe re-examining the secrets that he knows, and the guy who would know all the secrets. It's a big thing. I mean, is it speculative? Yeah, of course it is. And, can we prove it? I don't know. But if someone would know it, he would be the one. And so I just thought that was interesting. I put it in there, and I'm fascinated with the secret space program, and I don't pretend to know all that much about it, except that it seems to me more like a real space program than NASA. NASA, to me, just seems like they're putting on a performance, like they're pretending to be getting into all this stuff. But I want to know why a bunch of the guys from the 86 Challenger explosion are still alive and teaching in colleges. I want to know the answer to that. Am I a conspiracy theorist for that? I mean, maybe, but I don't know. That seems to me like kind of an important topic, like maybe something that the nightly news would want to cover. Of course, that's not going to happen.
Yeah, I've seen that photo online too, and it is kind of strange. You say they're still teaching in colleges. Are they going under different names?
In some cases, no. They're like, "Oh, it's his twin brother."
Oh my God.
They're like, a couple of them are like, "It's his twin brother." And you're like, okay, if that's your story.
Yeah, as an official answer. I mean, that sounds...
Dick Scobie apparently works in an ad agency in Chicago, and if you go to their page, the introductory image is of a cow flying on a rocket, flying around in circles, and it looks like the Challenger explosion. It's crazy.
Wow, man. And so we're on the same page that NASA is full of lies and the real space program is somewhere else. Well, that is what I think is so interesting about the Space Force announcement. Yes, a lot of people are making fun of it and saying it's stupid and unimportant, but not if you have this kind of context, because I'm not one to argue that we need to put more money or power under the umbrella of the military. Of course not. But if we're going to reel back the war machine, maybe going in and pulling this sort of stuff out of the deep corporate hands, you can give part of this war apparatus something else to do. And it does seem like the only way to really force the issue. If that is what the nefarious few are trying to do, who's to say, really? But it's curious. Also, you can find a lot of articles about the Rockefellers pulling their money from oil and putting it into clean tech, quote unquote. I mean, who knows what that means in its entirety? Because there is at least one case that some company that's working on 0-point energy, they put their money into that company. So where the Rockefellers go, the culture seems to follow. So I think that maybe it's a sign, but for those moves to mean anything, there has to be something, probably decades in existence, that you might finally have to open up for the sake of the economy, or maybe elements of the military want to rein this group in. So you got to mainstream the secrets kind of slowly, make it seem organic. Space Force might provide an environment for some of that to occur, but the point is, it does signal to me that there's really something to the secret space program Breakaway civilization claims.
Yeah, I mean, they talk about the breakaway civilization as a concept, but I don't think that that's even really so much conceptual as it is probably actual. I put a comment in the book that, like, if you think about the Pilgrims coming, it's kind of a stupid story anyway, the Pilgrims discovering the New World, but let's just go with this dumb story that's in the history books. Let's say that, Christopher Columbus and his crew roll up on the shores of America, and instead of being in the boats, the Indians find them and the boats are totally empty. Except for they find this big long stick, they pull the trigger, a ball shoots out of it, flies across the sky and kills a horse, right? So they're like, wow, we've got this power. Now, so at that point, that Indian has a decision to make. Do they share this technology with the rest of their tribe, this gun technology, this gunpowder and this magic, or do they keep it quiet and keep it for themselves? Now, I think that somewhere along the way, it might have been Roswell, it might have been something before that, it might have been something that had nothing to do with Roswell at all. But I think that at some point, people reverse engineered some sort of technology from people that were more advanced, whether that's people underneath us, people in the stars, I don't know. But to have that technology, reverse engineer it to figure out how it works for you and then suppress it and pretend like it doesn't exist and go underground and develop 0-point energy, develop TR-3Bs that are anti-gravity that can fly to the moon and whatever they say. I think it's reasonable to think that psychopathic families like the Rockefellers and Rothschilds, had they gotten their hands on some sort of technology that was advanced, their mentality would be such that they would want nobody to know about it, keep it for themselves, use it for their own enrichment, and use it as a tool to suppress other people too. I don't think that's an unreasonable thought to have for those families. I think there are some people out there that are saying we got to get a hold of this technology. We need to make it available to the public. There's free energy technology of Gary McKinnon years ago getting online looking for this 0-point energy technology because he thought that it was ridiculous that they should be charging people heating oil, in the winter in England, and, people were dying from freezing to death. And so he sort of had this idea like, I'm going to go expose this. And I think a lot of people have that intention, like, let's get our hands on some of this technology and expose it. But there will be unintended consequences that come from that as well. So we can't pretend that everything will be fine and every problem will be solved if we can only get our hands on some of this suppressed technology. But I think that technology like that should be brought out into the public. It should be made available. Of course, the oil companies would go crazy. They would lose their monopoly, and that's understandable that they would want to keep it suppressed. But who cares? Who cares about them? They've had their run. They've turned this world into a shithole from all of their explorations and the way they deal with us. They have no respect for us, so I don't care about their monopoly. I say, let's bring this technology to the forefront. And then at that point, we can decide whether it's too powerful for us. But I don't think it's for those controlling families to decide the rest of what's good and what's bad for humanity.
Cheers to that. And man, time is just flying by, and there's so many things in the book. Recently I interviewed someone who ranked conspiracies in a type of hierarchy as levels of understanding or wokeness, so to speak. And I thought that was really interesting because even though we might be on the same page with a lot of these things, it's interesting to see what other people find to be the most polarizing or the most impactful, how other people rank them. So I guess I would ask you, of the wide range of topics you cover, which would you consider the most out there, the least accepted or most polarizing? What's the bottom of the rabbit hole?
Probably the depopulation agenda, I would think, because it's so ominous and it has such vast consequences. And I think that for sane, rational people to look at something like a depopulation agenda, they have to roll their eyes and they go, this is ridiculous, guys. This is nothing but you guys looking for issues where there are no issues. But you have to think like a psychopath. I mean, the people that are putting these depopulation agendas into place are crazy. And I don't mean that like flippantly, like they're psychopathic. And so they don't think about things the same way we think about them. So to us to say, oh, there's a depopulation agenda, to roll your eyes and say nobody would want to do that, that's naive, because there's plenty of evidence of people not only wanting to do that, but putting that plan into place in the past and currently. I mean, we've got people like Paul Ehrlich and John P. Holdren, and these guys are out of their fucking minds with the things that they want to do. They've got books written. Paul Ehrlich has The Population Bomb. He says the first task is population control at home. How do we go about it? Many of my colleagues feel that some sort of compulsory birth regulation would be necessary to achieve such control. One plan mentioned involves the addition of temporary sterilants to water supplies or staple foods, or to the water supply. With limited distribution of antidote chemicals, perhaps by lottery, doses of the antidote would be carefully rationed by the government to produce the desired population size. Okay, he wrote this in a book. It's not like he got drunk at a party and accidentally said this to somebody. Like, he put this out there. He wants this to be known. John P. Holdren is not just some maniac sitting on a street corner talking to a lamp pole. Like, he was Obama's science czar, and he put in his book Ecoscience, which he put out in 1977, he says women could be forced to abort their pregnancies whether they wanted to or not. The population at large could be sterilized by infertility drugs intentionally put into the nation's drinking water or in food. Single mothers and teen mothers should have their babies seized from them against their will and given away to other couples to raise. And people who contribute to social deterioration, i.e. undesirables, can be required by law to exercise reproductive responsibility. In other words, be compelled to have abortions or be sterilized. Now, Obama made this guy his science czar. Like, out of all the scientists you could pick, you're going to go pick this guy. So when people say depopulation agenda, give me a break, you conspiracy theorists. Well, listen, it's not a theory. It's fact. This is what they're doing. They're putting this out there. You got a guy at the University of Texas, an evolutionary ecologist, and as my account, also a big-time asshole, a guy named Dr. Eric Pionka. It says war and famine would not do. Instead, disease offered the most efficient and fastest way to kill the billions that must soon die if the population crisis is to be solved. AIDS is not an efficient killer because it's too slow. My favorite candidate for eliminating 90% of the world's population is airborne Ebola, because it is both highly lethal and it kills in days instead of years. We've got airborne diseases with 90% mortality in humans, killing humans. Think about that. You know, the bird flu's good too. For everybody who survives, he'll have to bury 9. I mean, this guy wants 9 out of 10 people dead, and he's in a position of power at the University of Texas teaching kids this. So there is a real depopulation agenda. It's horrible. It's hard to think about. You see the Georgia Guidestones, which I kind of jokingly call the combination of like Stonehenge and the 10 Commandments and Waffle House. It's a weird place. You know, somebody spent a lot of money to put these 10 Commandments, and the first one on there is to reduce humanity to a population of 500 million. So they're coming. They don't want us around. And once people sort of understand that, then they realize, hey, these people, A, hate us. They have no respect for us at all. So would it be really far-fetched to think that the people would be lying to us about? Of course not. I mean, this is what they would be doing. If they're making statues about wanting to kill us, they certainly won't have a problem lying to us about these things either. So it's incremental, this sort of understanding of what's really going on. You talked about like levels of conspiracy. You can't drop John P. Holdren's book on somebody on day one because they'll just go, no way, sorry, this is like black belt level conspiracy. You know, this is like something that you sort of have to work up to. Let's start with 9/11 being sort of an obvious one and then work our way up to more of the depopulation. Well, maybe 9/11 is not the best place to start, but you know what I mean? Something that's a little bit easier to comprehend. And then as things build, you start to understand, well, look, it isn't a stretch to think that the people running the government would put maniacs in charge of their science program, because if the goal is depopulation, you would put Greg Carlwood in charge of science if your plan was depopulation, because you'd be like, hey, man, why are you trying to kill all these people? Like, just shut up, Greg, and pay a good salary. But John P. Holdren, they don't have to work on him at all. He's like, hey, you want to come kill 90% of the population? Yeah, absolutely. Sign me up. So this is what we get. So I think for people to be sort of too dismissive about this because it sounds crazy, I think is maybe not the best strategy. I admit, it sounds crazy. Nobody's going to deny that this stuff doesn't sound crazy, but just because it sounds crazy doesn't mean it isn't true.
Amen. And you're right. You got to lay out those breadcrumbs. It is a learning process. And then, of course, we teach you about the multidimensional lizard people after graduation. And you are right about depopulation. I'm right there on the same page with you. Like war, poverty, weaponized food, water, and air, cancer, vaccines, autism. I mean, there are millions and millions of people that have died because of these traps. And of course, autism, I think that's part of it. It's like they don't necessarily care if you're dead. They care that you're completely dependent on the medical system and offer zero resistance, which is why I think autism rates are rising. But let me hit you with the line that I hear most often when it comes to the depopulation agenda, and you can tell us how you would answer it, which is people always say to me, well, if there's a depopulation agenda, why is the population going up? They must not be doing a very good job.
Well, the population's going up in third world countries, but it's not going up in the United States, not the rate at least. I mean, they need people to make their $3 can openers in China and India, and they need people in Bangladesh to make their 50-cent shirts that they sell for $80. I mean, look, the population of the world, we're really left to go by the numbers that are given to us by the same people that lie to us about everything else. So I don't even know that these rates, I don't know that the numbers are accurate. How the hell would we ever tell? How would we check? I have heard an interesting statistic that I thought was really weird. They talk about overpopulation in terms of space. They said that if you got everybody in the planet compacted into one spot where they were just standing shoulder to shoulder, obviously you wouldn't want to live like that, but to give you an idea of the size that that would take up, they said it would take up a city the size of Jacksonville for the entire world. I thought, well, that's kind of an interesting thought. And then I've also heard Jim Marrs say that, something like all the people in the world could technically fit inside the state of Texas. Not that you would ever want to do that, but I think that there's a lot more room on this planet than we think. I mean, have you ever driven through Texas? I've driven through Texas a couple times.
Oh, yeah.
If you want to talk about, hey, there's no space. Really? Go to Texas. You're wanted for murder? Go to Texas. They'll never find you there. There's a million places to hide. So I don't know. I think that this is, gets back to that whole, the people running the show want, like you said, with autism is the perfect depopulation tool in a sense, because it leaves the people able to work sort of like in an automatron robotic sort of way, but not able to excel and not able to be of any threat politically, financially. They're not going to go out and create companies that are going to compete with the elite. So it's almost like a version of robot people, which is horrifyingly scary. And of course, I think they're probably going that direction anyway. But look, autism's a real thing. And the rates that have spiked, it's not accidental. I don't know that it's necessarily environmental. There's a lot of proof that shows that the items that are being injected into children, well, all of us too, if you talk about like the flu shots and things like that, that we should be avoiding. If you put these same ingredients into, if I had a lemonade stand and I added squalene, aluminum, formaldehyde, and aspartame and MSG to it, I'd be taken down to the police station and beaten with a rubber hose. I mean, this is ridiculous, but you can inject that into a kid bypassing their natural process of filtering it out. And it's not only not illegal, but you can make billions of dollars. I mean, something's wrong here.
And I do think that's a good point. Like, this is a lot of data to gather. Who's doing it? The World Health Organization, the Red Cross? I mean, you can't necessarily just take all that data as a given. And I've driven from Missouri to California several times, and all through there is so much empty space. Yeah, it's not the nicest space. It's not the most comfortable space, but Jesus, when I think about all the mobsters in Vegas burying bodies around the desert. It's like, absolutely, go anywhere. Just turn off the highway and go 2 miles, and no one will set foot on that piece of ground for probably a few decades. So that's where you would want to go to bury a body. Hopefully there's not a lot of bodies that need to be buried out there, people, but now you know where to take them. And, for me, that top level probably is the medical sphere, which is really just another component to the depopulation agenda. Vaccines are polarizing enough to think that the CDC and the FDA are complicit in an attack on children. That's a big can of worms. But then to talk about Western medicine and big pharma as really just a vehicle for oil tycoons to make more money. Whoa, now you're saying quite a bit, because that involves capturing the medical education to pull that off. And then the suppression of natural and plant-based alternatives, which people now just dismiss as bullshit. That is so crazy to have gotten people to think that way. I mean, that's a very successful campaign.
You have to give them credit. I mean, they take a long view approach to this sort of thing. They put these plans, they're multi-generational, so they don't expect their people to necessarily benefit or have it all over the course of their lifetime. But yeah, it's crazy to me that this has been going on as long as it has, that people have been complicit in this and have kept it quiet. They're evil. What they're doing is horrible, but you have to appreciate their level of commitment. You have to sort of take a step back and go, wow, like they have a plan, they stick to it, they put it in place, and it has been working. I mean, they have managed to not only sort of 2 for 1, they dumb you down at the same time while making a ton of money off of you. It's horrible to watch. God, on some levels I feel a bit hopeless, but then I take a step back and go, no. The first step to turning this whole thing around is to expose it and to let people know that, this is a real thing. You might want to pay attention to it. And then once people understand that, then it becomes a lot more difficult for them to put their plan in place. But you have to understand, they have control of the media. If they don't want something to get out, it doesn't get out. If they want to keep something under wraps, it's not that difficult for them to do that. There's quotes of David Rockefeller in the early 90s at Bilderberg thanking the media for staying quiet about this, for honoring your commitment to keeping this under wraps, because we wouldn't be able to put the things into place that we wanted to without your silence on this. So, I mean, it doesn't happen without a lot of people working on it at the same time. The media is definitely complicit in this by keeping their mouths shut. Of course, not only should they not be keeping their mouths shut, but they should be the ones trying to get everybody aware of this, but they're not. They stopped doing their job a long time ago, and it's a shame.
Mm-hmm. Indeed, and the medical stuff, I think, is some of the hardest to penetrate with people. And I have to give my parents some credit. They listen to every show. They're just proud of their little boy, but they get a lot of information they probably weren't getting for most of their life. And, my mom is in her 70s and on no pharmaceuticals, pretty healthy. I mean, she takes no drugs except Bud Light and an occasional bowl hit when I'm around. Right. But there was a time where she went to get her blood pressure checked out of curiosity. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, we need to get you in for these other tests. And we need to get you on these pills. And my dad was like, stop a second. This is exactly the kind of thing that we're listening to these guests talk about. Reel this back. If you got high blood pressure, okay, I'll take that. But let's look at how to solve that naturally. And sure enough, they did. And it's just an example of how quick you can get sucked in to that system, especially older people, because it's fear-based. And I'm just really happy that they've kind of put the medical establishment at arm's length, especially in their old age. Not easy to do. But I was also happy to see a section in your book about Nogales and the GC math scandal. I interviewed David Noakes about this a long time ago. It really resonated with people because I still get emails about that show, and I did find it to be really interesting. And it seems like you dug into that a bit. Can you remind people what that story was about and what you found when you looked deeper into it?
Yeah, that's an interesting one too. And that was part of the last sections I put in the book. But there's a growing list of dead holistic doctors. That is a fact. You're not going to hear it on the nightly news, obviously, but it's happening. So Nogales, what it is it's a protein made by all cancer cells and viruses. It causes an immunodeficiency. It's being found in children with autism in really high concentrations. And so Nogales blocks the production of the GC-MAF protein. That's capital G, lowercase c, capital M, capital A, capital F. And it prevents the immune system from doing its job. So without an active immune system, cancer and infections grow sort of unchecked. And it's a sensitive marker for cancer as well. Nagalase provides a powerful system for early detection. But so for some weird reason, it's been found in kids with autism. And this nagalase prevents the body from utilizing vitamin D that's necessary to fight cancer, prevent autism, and it also causes type 2 diabetes in some cases. So what happens is the nagalase basically disables the immune system like a burglar that breaks into a building, shuts off the alarm system that opens the door so all its buddies can come in and, ransack the place. So the holistic doctor is trying to figure out, first of all, why is there nagalase in these kids at the 18-month mark that wasn't present at birth? How's it getting into the body? And was it being introduced directly? And so their thought was that is happening through vaccines. And if it was being introduced through vaccines, was that accidental or intentional? Legitimate questions, I think. So that was happening, and the doctors that were specializing in things like this, like Dr. Jeffrey Bradstreet, turn up dead. After the FDA raids his business, 3 days later, he's dead under strange circumstances. This is happening all the time. You had Chris Noakes, was that who it was you had on?
David Noakes, I believe.
David Noakes. Yeah, he was involved in this in London, right? And did he have to move to Switzerland? Am I getting my stories straight on that?
That sounds about right.
Yeah. So GC math has been shown to work well against nagalase. And so you would think in a normal, healthy situation that Big Pharma would say, oh, tell us more about this GC math thing that you found, because if it's helping, we want to know more about. That's not what you're getting. What you're getting is suppression by them. You're getting them silencing people because they don't want that information to be out there. So listen, I'm not a doctor. Don't take my medical advice. Do the research on your own, but take a look into it. Yeah, it's something that's very interesting. And if you've got Big Pharma actively working to suppress it, that to me is a red flag. It just says, hey, maybe this is something you should investigate. When people that are working with it exclusively start turning up dead from, 2 gunshot wounds and then it's being called suicide, these are things that should get your attention to maybe check into it and see if there's more to the story than what we're being told.
Right. That is a great summary. And the holistic doctor deaths really do creep me out, man. I mean, you got a list of about 20 or so that happened just between June 2015 and April 2016. That's a small window, so I'm sure there are many more. And to quote the book, even within that window, you say, something happened in the summer of 2015 because 8 holistic doctors from Florida were whacked in less than a month. The timing and concentration of these deaths within a geographic area, such as Florida, and within a small window of time, beginning the summer of 2015, certainly gives the impression that this was not coincidental. And I tend to agree. We've just seen so much that we have to be skeptical of something like this. Anything that disrupts the apple cart, the piggy bank, or the agenda, you're going to find a trail of dead. And it's just unfortunate. I think we're both pretty cynical at this point because we've seen too much of this stuff. But on a hopeful note, before we go, with such ironclad control, rigged voting systems, and all this jazz, what can we do? Do you have any proposed solutions or best ways to navigate this backwards reality?
Well, I mean, the first thing is that we have to sort of explain to people that it's happening. To us, it's obvious. It's like, oh, this is, a corrupted system. But to the vast majority of people, they have no idea that the system is broken at all. This is normal to them. Things that they see on the nightly news are 100% real, either because they haven't investigated it or they just don't have the time in their life. They're working 3 jobs. They're trying to make some money. They don't have time to get involved in all this stuff. So I think the first thing that needs to happen for us is to educate people as much as we can on the fact that there are some things that are severely broken. The second thing is to realize that by no means is the game over. We still have the ability to turn things around. We have a beautiful planet and we have amazing human beings that we live with. Some of them are defective and they're never going to be fixed, but the vast majority of people are just really good people looking out for one another. We need to remember that too, because I get dark in the book about a lot of things that are happening, but at the very end, I try to remind people that, there's a lot of beautiful things in our future. We have to focus on those too. It's not to say that we forget about all of the hurdles and everything. We have to acknowledge them in order to go around them. But, at the core, we need to remember that things can be great. We're an amazing species. Yes, we've been screwing up this planet, but we can turn it around. We have the ability to add a lot to this planet, but we got to keep that in focus. And we can't be afraid of the darkness of these bastards because they need it. They demand it. They use fear. They use fear to control people. Part of removing their controlling mechanism is to find a way to not be fearful. It's tough early on, especially, but we have to remember that, don't be afraid of these people. Get to know your neighbors. We're really bad at that, especially in the United States. We're bad at that, but we need to remember there's some really great things in our future. Yes, it's been a bit dark, but that doesn't mean that it'll stay dark forever.
Wise words. I agree with getting to know your neighbors and keeping it local. I've been thinking about that a lot more lately. It's a good way to insulate yourself from the machine and separate yourself from it and kind of forge something for yourself locally. Local is where you can have the biggest impact. It's what has the biggest impact on you. And I do think local elections mean something. You can't pick the president. That's decided. But they're not going to every single county and every single state and town and choosing those representatives. I mean, that's a lot to rig. There are some, but I am hopeful that on a local election, you can control some of that stuff. And we could network and choose people that are more in line with our views for those positions. And they might not ever get very high. But again, local is what affects you and what you can control. And if you didn't have a TV, you wouldn't even know about a lot of that stuff that's pumped into your house that you're scared of. So I'm with you. I think that's all we can do. I don't think we get to fight the big machine ourselves. So we'll see.
I want to say really quick that I agree with you on the local government level. When I say that the politicians are corrupted, what I'm really talking about is I'm talking about the people on the federal level, the higher ups, the really higher ups. Locally, though, typically it's just people that live in the community and want to do what's right for their family and for their neighbors and things like that. So yeah, those people aren't the problem. Those people are the solution, if anything, to keep that local mentality of, hey, I'm just looking out for my friends. The problem is once it gets so big, you rise up to the level, you're trying to look out for everybody's family across the country, and that's a big task. But locally, yeah, I think that the people that get involved in politics there are doing so out of the goodness of their heart and the desire to change the community. That being said, I would never get into politics of any kind because I probably feel a bit beaten down sometimes from it all.
I agree, but I am hopeful that maybe there's some form of infiltration that could be done on a local level, and maybe that's just wishful thinking, but with such ironclad control, wishful thinking is sometimes all you have left. But man, great talking to you. I got to let you go eventually. There's just way too much in the book to cover in a couple of hours. Great job, though, because it is one of those conspiratorial textbooks that I tend to like, and it's hard to argue with their own quotes. So before we go, remind the people what it's called and any other info you might want to give them.
Sure. The book's called The Octopus of Global Control. It's available as a paperback and a Kindle on Amazon, and as a paperback and an ebook at barnesandnoble.com. And you can check out my Facebook page, which is hilarious that I have a Facebook page as I'm railing against how awful Facebook is, but it's The Octopus of Global Control. I'll be speaking in February at the Dollar Vigilante conference in Acapulco. And if people want to come to that, check it out, and then stay a couple days after that for Anarchapulco 2019, featuring Ron Paul, David Icke, and Dr. Cynthia McKinney.
Yeah, man, I think that's an interesting conference. I don't know how I feel about all the things that are important to them, but I look at the roster of speakers and I like a good bunch of them, and it'd be a vacation. So I think that is a fun one to think about going to. But
sure.
Awesome, man. I'm glad we could do this. I admire anyone who can write something this massive, and I think you can consider your karma cleared. So take care out there.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
All right. Something for the conspiracy purists out there, huh? Charlie Robinson, The Octopus of Global Control. Really great book. Really love the use of quotes to bring people into the conspiratorial worldview. Just like I said in the beginning, if you trust Bill Clinton and Neil Armstrong, that's cool. But you gotta digest these quotes and tell me what you think they're trying to say. They're saying something. But it is a great, well-rounded book overall. We hit a lot of the finer points, but there are plenty more in there for sure. I didn't expect us to focus on the moon landing and NASA quite so much, but it is nice to release a show where we can get into NASA lies without bringing up the flat Earth, without concluding that the entire model must be thrown out. Maybe you hate that. I don't know. But of course, also the multitude of things we can just classify under depopulation agenda, all very important. And it does just drive me nuts how many people just think everything is on the up and up. Nobody ever has any negative intentions when it comes to big pharma or the food industry. Everything's cool. Glyphosate probably isn't as bad as they say. Vaccine issues are nothing to worry about. Just across the board, almost in every sector, I see campaigns where the intention is to do harm, like massive harm. I don't think I'm crazy. I had a couple buddies over the other day, guys who I love, but we always leave the conspiracy stuff out of the conversation usually because it's already clear where everyone stands. And the only one who's on my side is the black guy, which has kind of been a theme in my life because they know the government can't be trusted. And actually, if you're not familiar with Dick Gregory, he was a really brilliant guy, someone I had always wanted to have on the show, but just couldn't get him. He was a black comedian who died last year, and he had said many things to the effect of white Americans have the luxury of thinking they can trust the government. Because if you're black and you haven't woken up to the fact that you can't, you really have the blinders on. I mean, you got no excuse, really. And obviously, he's painting with a broad brush, and he's talking to his specific community. You get it. And actually, I can't find that exact quote, but here's one like it where he says, "And you black folks are equally guilty because you should know more about the system than these white folks do. I mean, this is a country that put smallpox in the blankets of Indian women and children, injected 600 black men with syphilis, and you're going to question where AIDS came from? What kind of fool are you?" I like that kind of bold commentary. You know, they have a shitload of examples to cite that make it much harder for a black man to trust the system than some white kids in rural Missouri. Of course, I think we have plenty of examples of any race. All I'm saying is that I've never had a black guy argue with me about conspiracy. I've never had a black guy tell me there's no way 9/11 was an inside job. That's all. Something I have kind of appreciated throughout life. And I'm way off the point, but I was sitting with these guys and we were watching a documentary on fentanyl, the pharmaceutical grade heroin that so many people are dying of these days. And in the film, they say the drug was only supposed to be available to terminally ill cancer patients. And even what's defined as a terminally ill cancer patient is suspect in my mind after the shows we've done. But a very limited number of people was supposed to have access to this drug. Yet the company was making so much money. And you're like, wait a minute. Clearly, you're selling more than your market. What's going on here? And yeah, pharmaceutical reps started paying doctors. They were putting ads on TV so people would ask about it. And that is the 1-2 punch of these drugs. You tell the consumer about it during the Tonight Show commercial break. And then when they go in and ask their doctor, you give the doctor a kickback so that it's an easy sell. But they started giving this shit out for any pain, for back pain, for toe pain, whatever. They even would put people in the position, and I think we've all had shitty jobs that are high pressure like this, where they say you have a quota for how many people you're going to get to buy X, Y, or Z. But the rules are this, this, and this. And the rules conflict with your quota. So the person they interviewed was this woman who's like, yeah, I had to sell 50 a day or whatever. And I'm on these phone calls, and you're not talking to 50 terminally ill patients a day. So when they go through the process and they have their checks and balances, and someone on the other line who is the authority would say, okay, so we're going to approve this person. Are they terminally ill with cancer? And she said they were directed to just say, uh-huh. You don't say yes, point blank, but you just say, uh-huh. And they just green light it. And the whole thing works under that pretense. So people are getting hooked and they're killing themselves. But you watch these commercials that they aired. And you have doctors saying, this is a very helpful drug and it's clearly not addictive. They even address the fact that people are starting to say it's addictive and they say those are rumors that are not substantiated. It's like point blank. This is literally the most addictive thing that they've ever made. And they're just lying about it on TV. And we're watching this, and I just had to blurt out. So you guys think this is the only time they've lied? You guys think this is an isolated incident? You want me to trust a doctor? You're going to tell me that the cell phone thing isn't a real concern? Of course, we were all too high to really get into it at the time. But I see conventional folks confronted with one major scandal or lie, and they just don't see that it's systemic. You're going to watch something like that, and you're going to watch all the commercials where doctors were recommending their favorite brand of cigarette. And then you're going to tell me with religious conviction that you're positive there's nothing to the vaccine issue? How can you be positive? I could see you being undecided, but how do you take the side of people who've been lying as long as they've been around? It's frustrating. Anyway, sign up for THC Plus if you just listen to the free show that I put out, because it's a lot better, and $8 is what you tip a waiter for doing a lot less. I'm trying to save your life. TheHighersideChatsPlus.com. And in today's Plus show with Charlie, some of the things we talked about, of course, autism, vaccines, and the power of diet, death by astonishment, Charlie's top of the pyramid, so to speak. We also got into George H.W. Bush and the Reagan assassination attempt and the connections there. And then some of the things yet to come, like the prospect of a social crediting system in our future and the coming $1 trillion robbery. That was pretty fresh and got me a little concerned, but all good stuff. And I really recommend his book. But that's about it for me. We've really been on a good, steady course this month. 3 shows in the can already, 2 more to go. And the other 2 are quite different. But I'll just see you then. For today, I have done my part. Your move, NASA liars, depopulation designers, and oily appendages, the nefarious few. Your fucking move.
You know the plan has always been to hack your brain. MK Ultra's trying to drive you insane. They'll explode your heart if they think that's what it takes. You think I'm answering the phone? Well, I ain't. You gotta keep the curtains drawn, 'cause you don't want anyone thinking you're at home. Well, you're not. You should tape the mail slot. And baby, if I seem withdrawn, let me say it's 'cause I just don't wanna go and get whacked. Maybe you should know that the trauma affects you like it does everyone. It's just the game plan, it's what the world's become. They want a pat down and a swap. Don't you see what's going on? Well, now you know. You're better keeping on your own, 'cause you can see the masters lie too much. Oh baby, you can only trust yourself. And if you think the system's out of touch, it is, and you can only trust yourself. I hope you know the elite aren't your friends. They'll suck out everything from you in the end. And if for some reason you think I might be wrong, I wonder where you got that opinion from. You gotta keep the curtains drawn, 'cause you don't want anyone thinking you're at home. Well, you're not. You should tape the mail slot. And baby, if I seem withdrawn, let me say it's 'cause I just don't wanna go and get whacked. Maybe you should know that the trauma affects you like it does everyone. It's just the game plan, it's what the world's become. They want a pat down and a swap. Don't you see what's going on? Well, now you know. You're better keeping on your own, 'cause you can see the masters lie too much. Oh baby, you can only trust yourself. And if you think the system's out of touch, it is, and you can only trust yourself. might think that these problems are small, or maybe they aren't registering at all. Now they know you're naive and vulnerable. You won't believe all of the stunts that they'll pull, 'cause you can see the masters lie too much. Oh baby, you can only trust yourself. And if you think the system's out of touch, it isn't. You can only trust yourself. 'Cause you can see the masters lie too much. Oh baby, you can only trust yourself. And if you think the system's out